Kubernetes. Let's do that again. Welcome to another edition of the Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes Working Group Forum. Here is the Working Group Forum notes. If you'd like to add any topics, please do so. If you cannot, drop them in the Zoom chat and I can add them for you. We'll see if anyone else arrives in a few minutes and we'll just sort of bring them into the fold as that happens. But otherwise, let's get rolling on the various topics. So the first one we have is testing.
Yeah, I think we've had some discussions recently about whether we want to write integration tests for our repositories, I think, versus unit tests. Kind of what are the pros and cons of mocking certain things versus not, etc., etc. And at some point we decided, okay, we should have a dedicated meeting. But I figured this could be that meeting if we want to. So I haven't scheduled anything yet because maybe we can just do it now. But like if we don't want to, then I can schedule something separate up to the group, I guess.
Yeah. We talked a little bit more about this on the US team and came to the realization that none of us actually cared enough about making that testing change to be the champion for the change. So like, and we don't have a lot of consensus about like what would be the best change to make. So speaking for myself, I sort of decided like, this isn't something that I want to spend my energy on because I don't feel strongly enough about the merits of the change we proposed. So my plan was just to let it die on the vine, but if anyone else feels strongly about it, it could certainly be taken forward with a new champion.
Yeah, I mean, I feel relatively strongly about keeping the integration tests, but also I would like to see them against real clusters instead of EnvTest. I don't know what that entails in terms of cost. Like, I know we're spinning up concourse, so that maybe it's going to make it easier. But then, what do we do locally? I guess we all have a kind cluster locally, so maybe it's fine. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the challenge there is just that EnvTest is so much faster than a real cluster. And a lot
of but it's also
it doesn't have much fidelity, and we have to
some things that just don't work. Yeah, it's it's not great. I hope like if we have a decent real cluster, I hope it's not that much slower. But yeah, maybe setup changes. I don't know if we have to clean things up or if we have to create dedicated namespaces, stuff like that to avoid collisions. Like EnvTest is naturally self-isolated. It's in process. It comes with its process. I don't know, but it's kind of a different conversation almost. Like if we decide to keep the integration tests, then we can. You can see how costly it would be to move them over to real clusters and whether it would be worth it or,
Would that mean that we'd also want actual unit tests for the repository code to test drive?
I would say no. Like I would say have either or because they would overlap 90%, and so I wouldn't. And again, like they come with the problems of mocking foreign code in a way.
Yeah, it's just really hard to force some of the error cases when you're working with even a real API server and etcd, let alone a full-blown cluster, forcing the errors to drive out that part of the code.
I guess that's the main problem. That some branches that you just can't hit. Like it's very like there are some error conditions that come all together. So you either hit the first one or you hit none. So you can never you can't trigger the second error condition without triggering the first one because they always occur together. There is this kind of coupling. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly it's it's a price that I'd be happy to pay versus having the mocks, just because I feel much more confident with tests against real APIs than for this kind of code, like for the repository code. But like if we decided that we really wanted unit tests, I would have just them then. Like I wouldn't have both suites because like keeping them in sync, etc., is just too expensive, I think. Like that code is not that important that it's that it's worth to be covered twice. Like literally 2 full test suites covering all of it.
Maybe we could have both of the best of both worlds, I guess, because like we had this discussion, like casual discussion while pairing with Danny today, that like a long time ago in Irini, I guess even Irini, not the Irini controller, but the older Irini, we introduced these custom clients that would wrap the controller client that we're using underneath, the case client that we're using underneath, so that you can still like, and then you can unit test. Like if we did that, we could unit test the repositories with like fakes as we're used to, and then test the specific clients that we built. I guess one downside of this is that we're going to build a little bit of boilerplate. But I mean, we could generate this code, we could use generics, whatnot. And even if we do build the code, I guess it will be like a one-time investment or something that will not, like, will pretty much be done with it. Like if you look at the draft PR, it's touching the app repository. The app repository doesn't have the privileged client anymore. It's got an interface, the namespace retriever. You can already fake that. But it also has the client factory, which is giving you this really powerful client that's not typed in any way and really, really hard to mock, really annoying. Like if we had a typed client that like just a client for secrets and a client for apps, for example, might be enough for this repository, then we can just drive everything with unit tests, and then we can just test our clients against the, I don't know, like real cluster maybe, or EnvTest. I don't really know what the right way would look like, but then we can have both of best of both worlds, or maybe in other words, avoid the overlap by pushing the boundary a little bit, like just draw the line really, really low. Then we have a nice reach in our custom code. So I don't remember exactly why we ditched this approach back in Irini, but I'm starting to think that it might be a nice approach.
I remember working on it. It was such a great day. We deleted about 3,000 lines of code when we went straight to that interface instead of wrapping each one for each different type. So it made it maintainable, and it just got rid of a whole load of boilerplate.
Yeah, I guess the cost of this approach is you need to introduce an interface for every type we manipulate, and then we need to introduce a test for every type we name. Like if you create a secret, you still need to test them one by one. Like you need to test the implementations. You can make the interface generic, maybe, although I'm afraid you can't, just because you would need generics supported at the underlying client level. Like the underlying client level takes interfaces. So like if you take a generic type, you need to kind of feed it into an interface. I don't know if it's going to work. You might have to do casting anyway.
We can do all the ugly casting in one single place and just leave it under the carpet. Like just don't bother about it if it works.
Yeah, but you would have to still test each implementation, provided you have like a generic interface that I'm not sure you can. Like you still need to test each one of them. Like so if you create a secrets client, you need a secrets client test. Then you can mock that secrets client, but then you need a test for it. And ideally you need a test that pins everything you mock, right? So if you mock that this method called with A, B, and B returns C, then you want a real test that proves that that's true in certain conditions, right? So that's the price. If you introduce a new boundary, that's basically a new suite of tests to test the new boundary.
But at least they're all that simple, right? Like just very small. So it wouldn't be, the tests will be very simple. There will be a lot of them, but they'll be easy to write, easy to understand. While if you draw the line higher, it becomes really huge, because if you want a integration test on the repository level, there's logic inside dependencies, like many kinds of clients. The privilege client is implied by the namespace retriever. Then there is a user client. Like it's way more complex and presumably slower as well.
Yeah, I'm totally up for mocking the namespace retriever, because that's a thing. That's a very narrow interface that we control. It makes all the sense in the world to mock it. If we want to, we could try to see what it would cost to introduce,
Maybe we can
to do this for everything.
And
Yeah,
see
exactly.
how it starts. I mean, not do it in the code, but like just propose another draft. See, I mean, if it's terrifyingly bad, no one will be pushing for it. Just
Yeah, maybe just try one morning, see how far you get, see how annoying it is. Maybe it's not bad, but like it's the kind of thing that needs to be done on the code in order to be judged. Because like it might sound great in words, and then when you try to do it, it's a mess.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing how that looks. But one concern I do have, though, is if we get rid of the integration tests entirely and we just have units, those tests are less useful for refactoring, for example, right? So if you think about, we have a fair number of methods in the repos right now that do things like they list all of the resources in a space and then they iterate over them to filter them down. Say we want to change those so that we're using index fields or so that we're using gets. If we have this integration style testing that we have now with test-env, the test could stay identical and we can just change the implementation and we have confidence that that everything's working. However, if we switch to more of a mock style unit test, you have to completely change the test side to support that. And then you've also had to do a lot of work to get to the point where everything's mocked out. So I'm not necessarily convinced of the value of what we're talking about for that reason.
One of the things that draw my attention on the talk that Giuseppe mentioned several times about integration tests being scam, and I didn't realize, is that unit tests are pushing your design decisions, which means that if you want to change the implementation so drastically, it is worth paying the price of changing your tests as well, because otherwise integration tests are just verifying the behavior, but they're not challenging your design.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
maybe
keep in mind that what he calls integration tests or integrated tests is not what this thing, like integrated tests, what he calls integrated tests is tests that test multiple components that you own together. Well, here we are testing one component that we own with its associated third party. And this is a problem with overloading of the term integration test, which is used pretty much for everything, because like everything is some sort of integration. But
the end result, whether integration or integrated test, is that it doesn't challenge your design. You can write a completely terrible code and your integration test might still work.
Yeah,
I mean, the challenge here is that we don't actually have control over the case client interface, right? Like we can make a wrapper on it like we're talking about, but ultimately that's just adding a layer of abstraction on top of something we don't control. So yeah, I feel the same way that Giuseppe.
Yeah, so the argument about, I think, design pressure applies, I think, very well in, for example, in the case of handlers. Like when we test handlers and integration, then we have this problem because we're testing that whole, like we're testing the handler, the repository, everything, all the way down to Kubernetes, all as one blob. And that, I think, is not applying the design pressure that we need on our thing, because it doesn't allow us to define, I think, the repository interfaces properly, for example. But like for the repositories being at the boundary of the system, I think the argument doesn't apply as much, because as Matt said, everything beyond that is not under our control anyway. So there'd be pressure on an API that we can't change anyway, right?
Then again, there is the thing that we want to simulate certain error cases, and it's hard.
Yeah,
so
that's the main
it's all about where you want to draw the line between things that we don't own and things we do own. And I guess if we try and draw the line on a lower level, we might have more control over our stuff. And I guess what Matt said is true about refactoring, but also if we kind of have, like we have the E2E test suite, which I think maybe we're overloading a little bit. It's become too slow. We had to optimize. It's still not too fast, and it will probably become slow again. I mean, if we were to cut this suite down to just happy paths, so basically one test per story, just checking that stuff works, then we'll check all the wiring. And I mean, if you want to refactor something, you just pick your use case, focus your end-to-end acceptance, whatever you want to call it, see if that remains green. And then, I mean, if you want to refactor stuff, obviously the units will have to be changed as well because they're coupled to the current design. That could be kind of, I don't know, middle ground compromise way to address this problem, sort of thing.
I would say we could try it, but I suspect that what we have now is actually the best compromise. But like we could try it. We could try to introduce this our own interfaces around the clients and see how it looks like. My suspect is that it's going to be very busy. Like it's going to be lots of new interfaces, lots of new tests to be introduced, and not necessarily because we also have to keep in mind that like the closer you get to the thing that you're trying to abstract on, the less you're abstracting. So like if we make such interfaces, they'll be, you know, nominally that we would own them, but like if 99% of the behavior, if you're just delegating, you're not really abstracting much, you know. Like when we mock those, we're still making lots of assumptions, right? Unless we test them again, and like to test them, we need to introduce a whole new test suite. I would try, see how like we take like one of the busiest repositories we have, try to do this experiment, see what would come out of it. My suspect is that the cost would not, it would be not worth it if what it gives us is, yeah, we can test a couple of error cases that are otherwise not reachable. Yeah. Provided again, like perfect, we're not going to find the perfect solution.
Yeah,
but we can try and spend a morning and see how it looks.
That's the rub, is we were already at 95% test coverage. So that PR we made took us from 95 to 100% test coverage at the cost of turning our test into a Franken test, right? Which nobody wants. So.
Yeah, and like again, and it takes confidence away. Like if you're mocking something, again, you need to have a test on the other side. Like I think this is something that in that talk everybody skips because it's the last bit. But like if you're mocking something, you need a test that pins down that mocking that you're doing. Like if you're lying, like if you're pretending to be someone else, you also need to have a test that proves that someone else would do that in that mocking scenario. And given we don't have tests for the Kubernetes client, that would mean we are mocking something that we don't really know if it's true. If we introduce these like thin abstractions on top of the K8s client and then mock that, again, we need tests for that. And it's a whole new set of tests. So it could be worth it. I would try it. It could be worth trying it, but I suspect that, again, if it gives us 2-3% more coverage at the cost of, I don't know how many thousand lines of code, it will result, because that was what we had in Irini, right? We had that extra coverage, that extra mocking opportunity, but at the cost of thousands of lines of code. At some point, we just decided to ditch. So
I think, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if people still feel strongly about one of these approaches, I think I like Giuseppe's idea of spending a morning writing up a PR on this. It's a lot easier to have these discussions on concrete code than at this high abstract level. So I'd suggest that path.
Yeah, it's not a very strong feeling. It's just something that like we just recycled this idea today. We will definitely give it a go, and if it's worth, we'll open a draft PR, and I guess to trigger more valuable discussions.
So while we're on the topic of testing and integration tests, we've been running this experiment now for about a month and a half where we don't add new API integration tests. So I guess I wonder, is it time to get rid of them?
How did it go? Like, I know that I guess people were surprised about, defects that emerged just by writing more end-to-ends. But other than that, like, did you feel like you were missing something in your development process? Did you feel like it was harder to dry stuff out or drive stuff out, or I don't know?
I was very reticent to try the experiment, but I honestly don't have any complaints, and I'm on board to tear out the old integration tests and just go with end-to-end personally.
Nice. So I guess we might have gaps though, right? Like if we just delete them, stuff will be uncovered. So we need to actually go and fill the gaps.
We need to do an inventory on what we might be missing for sure.
So that's another chore about basically, yeah, getting rid of the integration test, but first make sure that
so essentially try and backfill test coverage with
unit tests, I would say. I think I did it once for that what was it, for that action that had that bug about the flipped arguments. I think that one was tested in that style. I went in and introduced the unit test, but it took me a morning by myself to do it for one file. So it's probably not a cheap change, but worth it on the long run for sure. Because it depends, like that code was full of ifs because it was the manifest one. So it was the one that was particularly hairy to test because it has like, I don't know, 20 parts. And I had to test them all. Maybe.
I think the actions are probably going to be the worst of it, right?
Yeah, but the manifest one in particular, because it's like, okay, if there is an app, if the app exists, if the app doesn't exist, if the environment variable exists, like there's lots of conditionality. I assume most of our handlers are not like that. They're just delegating and that's it.
I think in that case, I think at this point we have a fairly, we test all this paths in the unit test for the action itself, I think, and the handler we just only test, does an error come out, is it a success case? So hopefully we're already at a good place there, but we should definitely double check.
Yeah, maybe we could check coverage like by running the suites alone and see and look for gaps, I guess. Like running just the units should not give us a lower number than running just the integrations for starters. But also, yeah, like the coverage of one should be a subset, a superset of the other, right? So that we don't leave anything that was previously tested untested. Okay.
Cool. Lots of good discussion. Sounds like it's slowing a bit. So if you have last minute thoughts you want to make sure you get in, bring them up right now, or we'll move along to the next topic. Alrighty, sold. Next topic is HNC v1.0.0.
Yeah, just a quick one. They released the hierarchical namespace controller version 1.0, so they think it's production ready. I think their only major feature change is they finally introduced labels and annotations support. I don't think we need it, but now you can, you can apply label. You can ask the HNC to tag the namespaces it creates with custom labels and annotations, which I think is something that we wanted to have at the beginning when we implemented it, but now I think it's probably not needed. But yeah, I mean, personally, I was just very happy that this happened because for a long time, we've been unsure about whether it was a bit of a dead project or whether it was making progress, but it looks like they actually felt confident enough to release 1.0. So that's a good sign that we are depending on something that is actually maintained.
Yeah, definitely don't want to be in the business of relying on code that's abandonware.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there've been talks about replacing it with something custom, but it's not going to happen soon, I think. So it's good to be able to rely on this until then, if any, like if we're gonna do it.
Yeah, in the interim, it's definitely nice. I think the discussion about replacing it with something custom is still ongoing. Since HNC does a lot of nice things, but it doesn't completely fit what we want. So we still need to do a bunch of manual stuff. So yeah, but like we said, very nice to have something that's still supported while we depend on it. Cool. Moving along. We have PR to skip a CATS test for CF for Kates. For those of you that are joining us and are not totally aware of all the distinctions, CF for Kates is a specific product. This is this Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes working group forum, which is covering the conceptual space right now, focused on the newer projects, but we still discuss all of the umbrella projects. So anyway, heading it back to, if Dave is here.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, this was just a note because I'm part of the working group that maintains CF deployment and CATS, and the CATS pipeline is frequently blocked because of the testing we do with CF for Kates. And it's always this one test that flakes because it doesn't seem to always return the appropriate insufficient resources error message. It just times out. And so the test flakes. And that's probably 75% of the time. So given that we're in sort of heavy maintenance mode with that project, I figured the easiest thing would be to just skip that test. I don't think it's something we plan on addressing to try and fix it. So I don't think there's any value in continuing to run that test when we run CATS against it, against CF for Kates.
We could even consider just not running CATS at all against it. Like, depends on how much we want to.
Yeah, the concern I had there was that we do still have users that we know are using CF for Kates, and I didn't want to completely abandon knowing if we'd broken something major by not running CATS at all against it. Given that we're still doing things like bumping build packs and bumping components as they come through, and we do have automation around that, I wanted the coverage of at least running the basic set of CATS that we run. It's just this one test that's particularly annoying.
Yeah, it makes sense. And just turn that one off, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, if someone could approve the PR, then I can go ahead and merge that and shepherd that through CI so that we're in a good place. That way we can cut a new CATS release, and yeah, we can go from there.
Cool.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good. I'll definitely take a look. If anyone else wants to take a look as well, then that'd be great. Moving forward, we have project naming updates. Take it away, friends.
I added this, kind of dragged Chris into this too. I believe we have more definitive updates about the project naming.
Well, I haven't gotten clear word that the trademark applications have been filed. As soon as that happens, we can use it publicly, but I think we can, it's probably pretty safe to use it publicly now. So I don't think we need to be super hush hush on this. And I put in a request to, Linux Foundation Creative Services, which can help with a logo. If any of you all want to talk about a logo, we can dig into that. I also connected with Eric yesterday. We talked a little bit about, pulling in VMware marketing folks for this, but yeah, Karifi is it. And that should be no problem. We'll have the trademark applications filed. If it hasn't already happened, then certainly this week. So anyway, glad we figured that out. Naming things, it turns out, is hard. So well done.
Nice. Do you think we can start with the renaming? Because I think our main concern is we have a bunch of things to rename.
Yeah, I guess it's a yes. Like the main repository. Do we want to rename that from?
Yeah, maybe the Slack channel.
And the Slack channel, yeah. Well,
I can't think of anything else.
there's two things, like there's the working group, which I think should probably stay CF on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that
And
makes
then
sense.
Karifi should be the primary project there,
Mhm.
underneath that working group. So yeah, I'm not super opinionated on what you want to rename, but I would think that, the controllers repository would probably make sense. And yeah, the Slack channel, I suppose, would also make some sense. I guess,
we need to figure out what that means. Like, if there's links around, or I don't know, can we just rename it?
Yeah.
Do we need to create a new one? I don't know how it works.
I think you can rename it if you have a link to it. I mean, it's using some internal Slack ID anyway, so that won't break any links.
So it can be just renamed. Oh yeah, maybe that's easy then. Yeah, I mean, my concern is, can we do it now? Can I start putting chores in the backlog for people to do this, or is it too soon?
no, I think
Because
that's
given
fine.
we consider this like a blocker for releasing, and we are very close to release. Like, I think the milestone is like 95% done. So if I need to add these things to the backlog, I want to do it as soon as possible so that we can release as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think you can go ahead and do that.
Cool. Nice.
Another question, like, actually, I haven't showed this on here, but I've got a list of Cloud Foundry orphaned repositories. There's about a dozen or so CF for Kate's repositories. I guess now that this is going to reach GA, I'm wondering which of those, if any, this working group is going to maintain, or what needs to be maintained, or can those all be like, as soon as we have the initial release for this, do we want to officially archive those?
Don't know.
Okay. Well, we can.
I don't know. Like, I don't know. In general, I don't know what. It ties back to the level of support we want to provide for CFK.
Right.
I think that we might need to just consider, there are a few ongoing users of CF for Gates, and it seems like it'd be a little bit rude to, we've had announcements that, this is the Karifi stuff that we think that that's the future, but it'd be good to validate that they can start moving that onto that, or start playing around with it.
Right.
Giving feedback before we just like, nope, sorry, you don't get that Istio update, or you don't get any Cloud Foundry CVE updates or anything.
But in that case, then the CF for Kate's repositories that are going to be somewhat maintained, need a home. So I'm wondering if this working group is going to be that, or because right now they're sort of just on their own.
Yeah, that's the thing. At this point, if we want to maintain them for a little bit longer, then maybe it's better to make it explicit that they're ours, because otherwise they're like no one's land. And
right now they're just sort of, they're there, and but no one's explicitly responsible for them. So.
Yeah, I mean, you can PR the working group thing on the community repository to make this explicit if everyone agrees.
Right.
If you can provide me with the list of the repositories.
Yeah, I'll actually, I've pinged a couple of the working groups about this, but I'll just drop this. I don't know if you might need to write edit access, but if you want to take a look at this, there's about a dozen CF for Kate's repositories that they're named that. And so if you want to take a look at that, we can figure out which of these could maybe be archived. Cool.
Yeah, I sent you an access request.
Yep, granted.
Nice. Good.
Granted. Cool.
I'll worry about that later.
Yeah, this isn't urgent, but figured I'd just bring it up now.
Cool. Yeah, I do think it makes sense for this working group to absorb those, since they do fall under the umbrella. And then at least at that point, there's some tracing for what decisions have been made, and we can actually sort of justify what we want to do with them.
Cool.
Yeah, and then that's a little more explicit. Now you can have that pressure in the working group charter and set of responsibilities to say like, okay, we want to retire this stuff and focus on the new thing.
Yep, makes sense. Cool. All right. So moving on to what looks like our final topic of the day. Could we collectively help fill out the PR worksheet for Karifi? That's what this looks like.
Yeah, so I think this is a different PR than the group is typically used to. So PR in this context being press release. So one of the things that the foundation is basically Chris and I do is we work with a PR team who basically assist with a lot of the marketing sub-functions. And so if I've not said it enough times before, there's a lot banking on this iteration of the CF on Kubernetes effort. So one of the exercises that we have going at the foundation is having our PR team help us position this, put out a sufficient number of bylines, get enough eyeballs on the project, and basically help spread the word as much as possible. So they have a sort of set of ideas and questions for us to be able to work backwards and get the project ready for quote unquote public viewing. And one of those things is a bunch of PRs that they typically send out to their usual channels. So this worksheet that has been shared, that thanks Andrew for putting that up, has a bunch of questions that would really benefit some answers. But what we're looking for is basically some good inputs. Now, we could go through some of the questions if that's okay with folks, or if people want to put their inputs in individually and maybe want to circle back to it at a later date, that's kind of okay as well. Again, it's all anonymous, so feel free to put whatever you want in there, well within permissible community guidelines. But I guess a couple of the more important inputs that we're looking for is in terms of the date that we want to announce, if it's a beta release, or if it's a V 1.0, or if it's a V 0.1, or whatever it is that we want to do. I think it would be great to have some answers about that and start working towards making that information available publicly. Again, some of the questions in there might be kind of out of scope for the group. Feel free to ignore those. But if folks want to, start taking a stab async, you're more than welcome to do so.
Do we want to have this filled out like before we release, as we release, like, or in other words, should I consider this as another blocker for the release, or?
It's not quite a blocker, I guess. It will definitely be filled out and submitted to the PR team before the release. It's just, I guess, one of those things that that would benefit from input from the team as a whole.
Yeah, it might help to distinguish between, Giuseppe, I think you're thinking about the GitHub release, like getting bits out that are stamped 0.1, right?
Yeah.
And Ram, you're maybe thinking about what inputs do we need for a press release from the foundation? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is, like, would it be better if before we made the thing public on GitHub, this was ready, so that, or like, is it fine for us to just put stuff out on GitHub tagged as 0.1, and then like we can do this with time? Because the thing is, even if we put it on GitHub, I don't like, it's not like we're spoiling anything. It's like it's there, and then if the press release comes out a week after, I don't think anything is going to happen. I think the name was the main blocker, because we want to release with the new name to avoid having like a release with a name and then the next release with a different name, which would have been weird. But yeah, maybe we shouldn't wait for anything else just to put stuff on GitHub. We can put stuff on GitHub, and then it can be, it can be publicized at a later point if we need more time to get the stuff ready.
In that sense, definitely not a blocker, Giuseppe. So
Okay,
this is
cool.
more in terms of the project announcement as a whole. So I think the incremental GitHub releases can happen in parallel.
Okay.
Yeah. I think from my standpoint, it's probably best to have a look over the document and do some thinking and generate a little bit asynchronously. But I'd be happy to schedule like another meeting if you want to walk through some of that once we, or at least once I've had a chance to think about it. Not sure how others feel. We can take a stab at a few of the questions really quickly, but yeah, might just take a little bit of thinking and wordsmithing.
Yeah, maybe
Oh,
we
absolutely.
can review it together at the next meeting in 2 weeks, like, provided there is something in there by that time.
Does that work? Ron? If we
Yeah, absolutely.
fill it out and then next meeting, have it as an item to review what we've come up with?
Sure. I'll follow up on the Slack channel and post like a reminder or something to folks. And yeah, let's review during the next meeting.
Cool, perfect. Feel free to reach out directly to me as well, and I'll try to make sure that I get some people adding some text in.
Sure. Thank you.
Cool. So it looks like we are at about the end of our list. If you have any last minute topics you'd like to bring up, please do so. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up and everyone can have a little bit of time back. Gone. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for attending again, the Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes work